Welcome to the Barcode Podcast. My name is Ben Ponder. I'm your host, and I'm really excited to have Carrie Lumb-Dewey in the studio today, and we're going to be talking about her really fascinating CPG journey, and specifically some things around Stubbs and McCormick and what it's like to kind of transition an independent brand into a larger big food or big CPG company. So we're going to talk about a lot of different things. I want to remind our listeners and viewers that the Barcode Podcast is presented by Titanium CPG Insurance. Titanium protects forward-thinking consumer brands with a range of insurance products and risk management services that are designed specifically for natural and organic food and beverage brands. You can learn more online at titaniumcpg.com. So Carrie, welcome to the studio.
Hi, Ben. How are you?
Oh, I'm so great. So really glad to have you here. Excited to, I think we've kind of talked a little bit before the show. I'm excited about the different topics that we're going to touch on. But before we dive into that, you know the drill. So tell us about your best meal ever.
My best meal ever. So at this point, it was, I think I figured out about 18 years ago. I had the opportunity. This was early on in my career. I was told by a manager to go, as a reward for doing good work, go take my husband anywhere out to dinner and celebrate on the company and have the company pay for it.
So what company was this?
This was when I was with Clorox.
Okay.
So we're in San Francisco. We're in the Bay Area. There's a plethora of options.
San Francisco. Clorox is based in San Francisco.
It's based in Oakland.
Oh.
So I'm in the East Bay.
The Bay Area.
But we
Yes.
were living in the city.
Yes.
And so I decided to go to restaurant Gary Danko, which is one of the Michelin 4 or 5 star restaurants in the city.
That's right.
And
You're like,
amazing.
You get the free meal, you go for it. Yeah.
And when I went for it. We did the 7-course menu with wine pairings, cheese in the middle. That was probably the best dining experience I've ever had, not just from the quality of the food and the way everything was presented, and the fact that the wines were perfectly paired with what I was eating, but the service was amazing. Just overall, it was just still so memorable 18 years later.
Yes.
Yeah, it was not.
What did you eat? So again, you mentioned some of the things, but what do you remember? What any of the main courses were?
There was, I believe, there was a scallop dish, which literally melted in my mouth. It was so good. The cheese tray I remember distinctly because it came between, I think it was the 4th and the 5th courses, and they literally wheel this. And when you see cheese trays in movies, you're like, oh, it's what? No, there was 3 layers of cheese on this tray, and you could pick. It
was like
4.
a cheese wedding cake.
It was. Yeah. It was amazing. You were like, oh, wait, there's 4 cheeses on top, 4 cheeses in the middle, 4 cheeses on the bottom, and I could pick 4, any 4. And I was like, only 4? Wow. I didn't even know how to react. And then the dessert was, and I don't remember exactly, but I know it had strawberries in it. And those strawberries were just so perfect and so juicy.
Probably hand-picked, caressed. Exactly. They were the best strawberries in all of California.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just, I just remember we ended up celebrating an anniversary for it because it happened to coincide close with our anniversary. And it was just still one of the most amazing, culinary personal experiences I've ever had, and my husband and I still talk about it. We're like, Gary Danko, it's the highest restaurant experience on our list ever.
That's the ideal. Everything else is measured against it.
Yes. We went to New York for a birthday a few years ago and went to La Bernardine and went to Daniel and some of those amazing restaurants.
That's right.
They
have strong game there too.
It's still above it though.
Wow.
The Gary Danko one.
In the ranking.
And it might have been because I didn't have to pay for it. I'm not going to lie.
That does help. Yeah. There's no aftertaste in that with the check.
When you just turn in the expense and it gets paid.
There it is. I love it. So let's back up a little bit. How did you end up in CPG?
Okay, so my story is a little bit different than I'd say your typical CPG person. I actually got my undergraduate degree in accounting and finance and spent 4 years as a tax accountant.
Okay.
So after 4 years of having no life between January and April, I decided there needed to be more to what I wanted to do. The part where CPG comes in is even back then, I was working on CPG clients. So I was based in St. Louis and I was working on the Ralston Purinas, the international arm of Ralston Purina Agribrands. I was working on Earth Grains. I was touching these CPG companies then. So I knew when I was leaving tax that I wanted to go into CPG. What role, I wasn't sure of.
What was it in those early days that, even as you're working on those client accounts, what was it that drew you to the CPG part of it, besides it was familiar to you?
I love the idea of being able to walk into a store, whether it be a grocery store or Walmart or Target, and see what I was working on.
Yeah.
And I still, even to this day, get a lot of pride when I see a product I've helped hit the shelves. There's just something.
It is really pretty cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like you walk in and you can go, I used to do this with my kids, and we'd go in the grocery store and they'd be like, "Dad, do you know those people?" I'd be like, "Yeah, I know those people," or whatever the thing is, and it's fun. It's just kind of this fun thing where you're like, "Oh, I remember when they were nothing," and then like they're a big deal now, and that's so cool.
Yeah, and that really was the joy for me, was the idea that I could do something that I could see on TV, in a magazine, in a store.
Yeah.
That's where CPG really resonated with me. And so, went back to school, got my MBA, had the opportunity to go out to Clorox in the Bay Area to get my CPG training, and that's where the story began.
Was the St. Louis to Bay Area transition easy? Again, like kind of a sleepy Midwestern city. We lived in St. Louis a long time ago. Really pleasant city, but not as go-go as the San Francisco Bay Area.
I think it was more challenging for my husband than it was for me, because
you were fine with it.
He was born and raised in St. Louis. I grew up in Kansas. We're Midwest kids at heart.
Yeah.
But I always knew I wanted to go and explore. So
Yeah.
fast-paced was in my nature. And for him, it was a little bit like, whoa, wait, what? Because I moved him to North Carolina for 2 years, then to the Bay Area. And so it was 2 moves in 3 years. And
That's a lot.
It was a little bit much.
It's good. It was stretching.
But
Yeah.
it's an amazing, we still say it's one of the best things we've ever done.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily where we thought we'd end up after business school, but it was exactly where we were supposed to be.
That's awesome. So you started off at Clorox in. So how did that work? Clorox owns a lot of. It's not just bleach.
No,
so
it is not.
So many different products, right? So and you can there's always things coming and going in that portfolio. Then, but what brands were you kind of focused on at that point?
So I like to say I was in the group of brands that nobody knows Clorox owns.
Right.
So I worked in their specialty division, which included their cat litter brands, Scoop Away and Fresh Step. It included Kingsford Charcoal. It included their food brands. They own Hidden Valley Ranch and Casey Masterpiece barbecue sauce.
Oh yeah, those.
Yeah,
that's right.
Kingsford's was at the time a $500 million brand. It's now $1 billion brand for him. So it's not a small division.
No, it's not. Yeah.
But it wasn't what Clorox is known for. It's typical cleaning. So
That's right.
and there were a lot of things now looking back at my time at Clorox that were preparing me for the future, but I didn't know it at the time.
Yeah.
I worked very closely. I worked on Kingsford Charcoal, so I got grilling category experience very early on, which translated to Stubbs. I worked in the food division, so learning all about these up-and-coming brands. My actual last job at Clorox was brand manager over new products, which meant I was walking the fancy food show,
Right.
looking for new brands for Clorox to potentially acquire and putting them into testing to see how viable they were.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit funny how it all
What did
connects.
it mean back then, like when you said put it into testing? Like how do you put something, you walk across, you taste something in San Francisco at the Winter Fancy Food Show, and you say, this is interesting, I'm going to put this into testing. What does that mean?
So the big companies are extremely conservative.
They are, yeah.
And that's the part that you forget when you're not in them. But they are extremely conservative and they don't like to take risks. So they do a lot of homework before they acquire companies. So what it involved was we would go to the fancy food show, we would walk, we would taste a few products, we would write down a few names. We would go buy their products at the specialty food store or wherever we could find them. And we would sit there with them for a couple of weeks talking about them, and we would write concept tests. So these are product ideas that you put in front of consumers to get reactions.
Okay.
And Clorox had a database of these baselines for years and years and years and years. So you knew what was likely to be successful and what was likely not to be successful. And so that was what I was doing, was literally writing up, ABC product, here's what it's about, here's what it delivers, here's what the consumer can expect, and then sending it out through their research portal to consumers to get their reactions to it. Getting
So
the results.
but in this case, consumers are only getting reactions to the idea behind
Right.
it. It's like, hey, if we did it's a different kind of barbecue sauce or whatever it is, would you think you'd like that, right? And so then you're making decisions as a large entity around whether we take this acquisition opportunities seriously based on, that's one data point at least.
It was one of many data points.
That's right.
But that literally it was just a purchase interest. Like, are you interested in buying this product? Yes, no. And then how does that purchase interest go on a scale of 1 to 100? And how does that purchase interest compare to, because Clorox would put its own new products in. So like I'll use Clorox Greenworks as an example when they were launching that, their green cleaning, they put that in there. So that's a benchmark of something that they consider a high success. So they would compare all of that and look at that before they went farther down the path.
That's right. Because they're so big and their portfolio brands are $500,000 or half a billion to multi-billion, right? So it means that, and I think this is an interesting thing for startups and early stage businesses to really kind of understand. They can't acquire you until you're pretty big, because if you are $5 million a year in sales, you'll get squashed, even accidentally. It just can't work at scale. And so you have to reach this sort of escape velocity on some level. You have to be big enough that it's at least plausible for them to plug you into this broader engine that they're running. But then also they can't go after, and this is an advantage for you as a small brand, they can't go after these tiny niches, right? Because those aren't big enough. They don't move the needle. And so you have an opportunity to go after a thing that's the addressable market is, at least today, perceived to be too small for them to bother. But if it's a growing niche, then it could be something that raises itself over time above a certain threshold, and then all of a sudden you're doing the purchase interest things.
Right. And it's also, the other thing to keep in mind as an entrepreneur is it's also cheaper for them to buy you as a brand that's established in this niche or in this fast-growing area, or in this area that's being reinvented, than it is for them to start something from scratch.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to use Greenworks as an example, to go into natural cleaning, they spent millions of dollars to do that, and they probably could have waited and acquired Method a few years later for, not saying they did, but I mean, those are just examples. And so that's, that is the thing that you think of, they're super conservative.
That's right. And there's, and I think for some of the savvier of the big CPG or big food, whatever it is, companies, there's a recognition that they go, we're not that good at this, right? So it's expensive, it's slow. We can't tell authentic stories because it's all effectively made in a lab or made in a kind of a boardroom, right? So there's a series of advantages. You're certainly, as a small company, you're at many disadvantages, right? But you do have a small set of advantages that if you ignore or fail to exploit, it's really to your detriment, because there are certain things that this giant, almost infinitely resourced entity can't do. Yep. And you've got to do the things that they can't do.
Yep. And that's where the authentic story is exactly what you're saying, is that's what they're looking for. They're looking for brands that provide something they can't build.
Yep.
Because these big companies, the Krafts, the Heinz, the Cloroxes, the ConAgras, the big guys out there, people know who they are, and their brands aren't perceived as positively as maybe they were 20 years ago.
Right.
And so they put out a new brand, and they're like, it's just big food making stuff up, and they're not going to tell us the truth.
That's right.
So if you can build a brand that is built on your history, your own personal experience, a really good, story with a product behind it that delivers,
right,
you're going to fill that hole that they can't get to.
Absolutely. I've heard people describe certain people as being classically trained in CPG. Do you feel like your time at Clorox was a form of that classical training?
Yes. Yes.
And what does that mean to you, right? What does it mean because I think it's interesting, a lot of startups or founders, they might be people who don't have any background in that world at all. And so they don't really understand like data. Like, what kind of investment are you making in data? How are you utilizing that data? All this sort of stuff. What does it mean to be classically trained if you don't come from that background?
Classically trained, as you look at it through the eyes of big CPG, means that you have a wide breadth of experience touching a lot of different things within the business life cycle of CPG.
You move between desks if you're in brand management or whatever. You move between brands. You manage projects. So, I mean, I'll go in with the
rose-colored glasses of a business school student. You're going into marketing. You're like, I'm going to do advertising. I'm going to do product design. I'm going to do packaging. That's what I'm going to do.
I'm going to get to know the celebrities in the Super Bowl
Exactly.
ad. Yeah.
Yes, that is a piece of what you do. But if you go to a Clorox, which is probably a little like a Clorox, a P&G, a Kraft, they're a little more analytically based. Your first year is really going to be spent looking at syndicated data through IRI and now SPINS, I guess, and then building the volume plan, managing a budget, just like
lots of Excel spreadsheets.
Lots of Excel spreadsheets, not super sexy stuff.
That's right.
You get to the super sexy stuff, but I mean, sometimes you're going to be tasked with managing, from my own background. You're working on a brand like Kingsford, and your director comes to you and says, "Hey, Carrie, we need you to lead a project." And you're like, "Great, this will be awesome. We need you to figure out a way to not have to build another plant." What?
Come again?
What does that mean? But to that point, my experience at Clorox and the classically trained definition means that I have not just touched marketing. I've touched operations. I've touched finance. I've touched advertising. I've touched product development. I've touched R&D. I've touched market research. So, am I super deep in any of those? No, but my breadth of experience is very wide, and it's truly a general management training background to really kind of come up as an owner, as a business owner and a business operator.
Right, and you kind of eventually the goal is you work your way up the ladder, and then you own a P&L, right? And you're like, okay, I'm responsible for the success or failure of this brand or this business.
Correct.
Right. So you did that for a while, and then what came after that moment?
So realistically, I loved being in CPG. I loved being at Clorox. It was a great company, but raising a family in the Bay Area,
it's expensive and challenging.
It's expensive and challenging. And my mother had relocated to Austin probably about 5 years before. And we had loved the city. And so I had an opportunity. My husband could transfer with his job, and I had an opportunity to move to Austin, and I had to take a step out of CPG at the time because CPG wasn't as big as it is today in Austin.
Yeah.
But I got the opportunity to move to a city that I love and work with still some fabulous people. And I was able to work at a jewelry company called American Achievement, and I worked on the retail side. So while it wasn't a true CPG product, I was still selling my products through Walmart. I was selling them through retail jewelry stores. I was selling them through Kmart. So it was definitely connected to what I had done before.
Absolutely.
And it was a lot of fun. It was a really enjoyable, kind of semi-detour.
Yeah, that's again, sometimes those detours can be productive or fruitful detours as well. You get a different perspective and that sort of thing. How did you wind up at Stubbs?
So that story right there of moving into American Achievement, Matt Gase, who became CEO of Stubbs in early 2011, was the general manager of my division when I was there. So I didn't work directly for him.
And this was associated with Balfour and commemorative brands and this sort of thing. That's right.
And the yearbook company and all of that. It's all the same company. And so Matt was in charge of our group. And so I had a VP of marketing between me and him. But he moved over and became CEO of Stubbs and reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm looking for someone to head up our marketing department. Would you be interested?" And I was working in a restaurant at the time doing marketing for them. And I was like, oh my God, getting back into CPG in Austin. Yes, let's go.
That's right.
And I had barbecue experience from my time at Kingsford. So
And Matt is also classically trained in CPG.
Matt is also classically trained. So our backgrounds meshed well, and we knew kind of the expectations going into it.
Right.
As I entered my second tour of duty with him. But it was definitely worth it. Plus, Stubbs was such a fun brand and had so much potential when I walked in there that I just couldn't wait to just really see what we could do with it.
That's awesome. And we've, Stubbs had been around for a while at that point, maybe 15 years or so. In that vicinity and that sort of thing. A couple of weeks back, we interviewed Scott Jensen and kind of talked about some of those early days. But this was a different phase in the life of the business of Stubbs, right? So Stubbs, this was not, Stubb had since passed away several years prior, and so it was kind of the next phase of Stubbs. Stubbs had pivoted and had really kind of planted its flag as a natural alternative to a lot of the high fructose corn syrup kind of brands that were at that point kind of ubiquitous on the shelf. And so what were your marching orders at that phase in the life of Stubbs?
My marching orders were really to come in and put some of that classically trained discipline behind a very entrepreneurial marketing effort.
Yeah.
Stubbs had, to your point, it had done a lot of different things and experiments. It had, as entrepreneurs do, you put things out there, you see what sticks.
They had a restaurant and a live concert venue. Let's try that. Let's do all this stuff.
They had a meat company. They at one point owned I'm sure Scott talked about this, they owned a spaghetti sauce company. There's some very interesting things in Stubbs' background.
That's right.
But to that point, they had decided to focus, and they had said, we're going to go down these paths, and we're going to march on all natural and gluten-free, which, as you said, it was brilliant because it was done before it was important to people. And
that's right.
It kind of became important.
We take this for granted now.
We're floating the boat.
It was not always that way.
It was not always that way.
Yeah.
And that's funny because it was just not even 10 years ago. It was not always that way.
I know.
But, to come in and put some of the disciplines around it, to make sure our event team and our social team, I say team, it was two people, it was me and one other
Small
person.
team.
Make sure that everything was speaking with one voice, to make sure that the brand was communicating as clearly and as concisely as possible, to make sure that, we knew who the Stubbs consumer was. So early on, Stubbs consumer was the consumer of barbecue sauce. But as you get to where it was when I came in,
marinades and barbecue rubs.
Barbecue sauce and rubs and marinades. And the thing is we needed to understand who was the person we needed to talk to get them to either buy more Stubbs or tell their friends about Stubbs.
Yeah.
And that was some of the work that we did in that first year, was really understanding who our core consumer was. And I think it blew some people's minds, myself a little bit included, when we did the study and we found out that, our core consumer was not Bubba the barbecuer, the guy in the backyard, small town guy.
That's right.
But it was wealthy suburban moms.
Entering barbecue contests or things like that. Yeah.
Exactly. It really wasn't that person. It was suburban moms who cared about what kind of food they were putting in their kids' bodies. It was the whole food shopper. It was a little bit of a different take. And so it took some adjustments there. But once we had that information, we were able to really put marching orders in place from here's how our product strategy is going to be. We're going to change our labels. Here's our communication strategy. Here's how we're going to go about getting more trial and awareness for the brand. And we, kind of put those wheels in place over 2012 and 2013, and between 2011 and when it sold in 2015, doubled the revenue. So it was
made a meaningful impact.
Exactly.
I think that's really important. It's an important insight that I think people take for granted. I think that a lot of the founders that I talk to probably have this misplaced notion that they understand who their consumer is. And while on some level that may be true, right? They may understand an aspect of that. It's fascinating and sometimes revelatory to really dig in, and it's almost an unsolvable Rubik's Cube a little bit, because it's constantly evolving. And when your business starts and you're in a handful of stores or whatever it is, yes, and hopefully, maybe you're even super tiny in your farmer's market level, you actually have this rich data set of who you've seen the people yourself, right? Okay, this person actually bought, this person looked, sampled, said no, or this person spat it out, this person said, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. So you have that as you grow and evolve, and as your brand grows and evolves, and as you add new products and flavors and all this stuff, you're constantly rediscovering who your consumer is. And I think if you get too rigid and you say, no, back in 1995, our consumer was this, and you're fast forward to 2015, might be a different person altogether, right? You're who buys it today, who buys it in Austin, Texas versus, in Charlotte, North Carolina, might be very different people.
Yep. And if you think about that, even going back to, who Stubbs consumer was in 2011, when we were, gluten-free and all natural, and, now it's non-GMO, it could still have continued to refine itself. And that's the piece. That's one of those, going back to the classically trained conversation we were just having, one of the things I learned at Clorox that I say all the time is, no matter how much we think we are not our consumer.
That's right.
And it was never more apparent than when I was at Clorox, because we were in this 24-story building in Oakland, California, riding a subway to work. We're not out buying this at Ma and Pa's gas station or grocery store.
That's right.
In the middle
That's
of
right.
Kansas. And I can say that because I'm from Kansas.
That's right.
So that's the one thing, is no matter how much you think you are your consumer, just know you're probably not.
That's
and
right.
that it's going to change over time.
There has to be a little bit of a self-awareness about that, right? And that you're constantly discovering and rediscovering who that consumer is. And that consumer also is often not singular, right? So there's there might be plural audiences that you're addressing. And how do I address this audience in a way that maintains this kind of internal fidelity to the brand and the messaging, while making sure I speak with the right accent, right? The right accent to the right audience, and that kind of thing is important.
Well, and that's where I go, like, Bubba the Barbecuer was not our core consumer, but Bubba the Barbecuer was still in there.
That's right.
That person was still purchasing Stubbs, and so we spent a lot of time, and that's where your brand positioning comes around. Like, what does your brand mean? And then once you've defined those three things that your brand means, how do you speak to each group of consumers using just those three things?
Right.
And so that was, the part where we had one part that would speak to Bubba. So we had all this authenticity. We had all this barbecue heritage. We had all this history with Stubb the man in the restaurant, and his history and his quality
Ladies
of
and gentlemen,
food.
I'm a cook.
Exactly. We had all of that. That spoke to Bubba the Barbecuer. Then we had quality, which was the all naturals, the non-GMOs, that spoke to the mom. So you can, as you go through it, and that doesn't necessarily, to your point, that evolves with your brand too.
Right.
And the way it may be stage A with product one may be different when you have 3 different product lines and 15 different SKUs.
Right. That's right. Now, so you're overseeing all these different marketing activities. How did the packaging or messaging on the packaging evolve over your time there?
There were a lot of things that were consistent from day one to August 2015 when it sold, and that are even consistent to this day.
Yeah.
But there were pieces that would change. And the one thing that we did over time, if you look at the Stubbs packaging, and we had all of it, which was fabulous. We could go back to day one and see what they said. You can do a timeline. Yeah. We could. And, ladies and gentlemen, I'm a cook was on the original packaging. Mm-hmm. And then through a couple of iterations in the 15 years pre-me, got taken off. But then we found out through talking to consumers that matters. So we put it back on. So what we did was we were just really focused on what was the most important message to the consumer at that time.
Yeah.
So when all natural was the most important message to the consumer, that was the most prominent.
Right.
When, like now, I think non-GMO is the most important. So it's on there. I can't speak to it because I haven't been with the brand for a year and a half now. But I'm pretty sure that's the most important thing. And so what we found was it went from having a lot of different messages early on to really kind of refining and simplifying and making sure what the brand said to its consumer was what was most important to that at the time.
Yeah,
and still held true to the brand.
Right. Well, and I think Matt Gase and I had talked, and I know that there was one evolution of the packaging where there was a drawing versus a photograph and all this kind of stuff, and the co-founder Stubb, C.B. Stubblefield had passed away, and so there was some hesitancy around like transitioning to that, and then I know ultimately the decision was made to kind of have his likeness on there because it really reflected the core image and value of the brand, right? That gave people an identity.
It did. There were 2 reasons for kind of going back to having a real photo of Stubbs. So it was like originally it was a sketch drawing of Stubb, and he passed away, and they didn't feel right putting a photo of him on there, so they kept the sketch drawing, but they modified it slightly from the original. But the thing was, at the time, when we were doing this packaging change, it was late 2011, early 2012, the big guys were fighting hard. And I'm going to say this, the big guys were launching fake brands. They were launching Garland Jacks with a fake story that was essentially Rufus Teague was out there that's not a real person. There was a lot of, no use of air quotes, people coming into the barbecue space that didn't really exist. And so for us, it had always been kind of this, is he real or is he not real? Is he real or is he not real? And we'd have consumers ask.
Yeah.
And so we made the strategic choice to not only put his face, a photo of him on the bottle with that packaging change, but also raised the awareness of the fact that his two grandsons, Rocky and Reggie, were active with the company. They became messengers within our social media.
Right.
So Rocky and Reggie started becoming more of a presence so that people understood that this was a real brand with real people and real roots.
And a legacy.
And a legacy and a history. And we started sharing, the real pictures of Stubb on social media with Dolly Parton, with Johnny Cash, with the people that he had the opportunity to cook with.
Right, because
So
he
it
was
pretty
he was a
amazing.
big music lover, and he had known all of these people.
With his restaurant in Lubbock, there were people that would come in because it was very well known for being a place for up and coming musicians. And so as any musician that was a musician in the state of Texas that was up and coming went through Stubbs. There's pictures of him with like a 16 or 17-year-old Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Yeah.
And it's amazing when you think of all the people that he touched just with this one little building. And his one of his other sayings, besides "ladies and gentlemen, I'm a cook," was, he wanted to spread his love around the world and spread his food around the world. And so to him, that's how he did that. And when you think of how many people he really touched, it was amazing. And so we had to really grab onto and be able to tell that story.
Yeah.
That this is a real man and he's got this real legacy. So it was a lot of fun, but it was, some of the board members were like, "Are we sure we can put his picture on there?"
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
So
Those are important. And again, decisions you don't make lightly, right? Because you're trying to be respectful and all that kind of stuff. Now, I want to, 2011 to 2015 is a time of rapid change in social media. How did you process all of that from the perspective of a brand, right? Because I think sometimes people assume, like, oh, you're launching a brand today, I need to be on this platform or that platform. It changes, it evolves. It's just a moving target, right? And so what worked, and maybe worked spectacularly well for someone else, if you attempt to just carbon copy that exact strategy today, sorry folks, the world's changed. The kids are on a new platform today, or whatever it is, right? So how did you navigate that?
It was interesting to say the least. When I started at Stubbs, Facebook was our platform, but we were to an extent under leveraging Facebook, and we were posting once every couple weeks and trying to get attention. And the thing that I think with how social media is evolving now is you just need to continually pay attention to what the social media does and how it does it. And that was our biggest key learning. Stubbs was on Facebook. We attempted Twitter. That was a whole different world. We attempted Pinterest.
Yeah, Twitter's tough.
Twitter's tough.
Twitter's always been tough for brands. Effectively, the main value is it's a customer complaint department.
Yep.
Is really it.
And we did get some of that
and
from
you can
it.
respond as long as you respond to it and that sort of thing. But it's not, people don't discover brands on Twitter. That's a rarity.
And we kept trying to tell our story on Twitter, and it's not a storytelling device. You need to be there to that point for customer service.
Yeah.
What we found were the best storytelling devices were Facebook and now Instagram.
Right.
Instagram, we definitely started leveraging, but even not until 2014, I feel like was when we launched on Instagram.
Yeah.
And what we did too was we paid a lot of attention to the analytics. So we started watching what went well, what got a lot of likes, what got a lot of interactions. We found that videos, and especially when we could put real videos of Stubb out there, just blew through the roof because it reinforced that he was a real person, reinforced our authenticity. People loved it. So it's just, I think continuing to watch what works for you, like actually paying attention. Don't just throw content out there. It's not the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come.
That's right.
That's not. You have to be very mindful and very thoughtful about it and be willing to try a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And just because it doesn't work once doesn't mean it won't work the second time.
Yeah.
Now, I wouldn't try it more than that, but
well, you have to have that experimental mindset, and you need to know a lot of times what I tell people is you go into it with a hypothesis. And any scientific experiment, if you go into it with a hypothesis, even if the result is not what you thought it was going to be, as long as you learned something, it wasn't a failed experiment, right? But then you refine your hypothesis based on that result.
Yep. Well, and I think the thing that's changed even from kind of those days, 2011 to 2015, is that we used to be able to put content out there and content would find people. Now there's a lot of the pay to play. So you need to remember when you're on social media, for the most part, you're talking to people that already like you.
Yeah.
and that are already fans of you for whatever reason.
Right.
So acquiring new fans, social media is not always going to be the greatest for that unless you start promoting your post and putting a few dollars behind it, which is actually an extremely efficient way to find new customers. But
if done well,
yeah,
not the spray and pray approach,
No.
because you can actually burn through a marketing budget really fast doing
Yes.
that. Now, again, it was a different world. People who built businesses back in the early 2000s or early to mid 2000s based on Google AdWords. That was awesome back then, right? It can be very expensive now, right? Same thing with Facebook. In the early days, a sponsored post was highly targeted. It was great, lots of bang for the buck. Now, because Facebook owns so much real estate, the prices of real estate went up.
Yeah, that's where you just take $50 or $100 and test something and see what it does. And if it doesn't do it, don't do it again.
That's right.
I mean, that's
you're looking for a lift.
And social media will continue to evolve. I will tell you, my 14-year-old daughter, almost 15, is actually on Instagram a lot less. TikTok is the new thing. I don't understand it. I don't know why, but brands are going to have to figure out how to get in front of these consumers in 10 years when TikTok becomes the new Instagram.
That's right. It's true. Yeah, absolutely. 15-year-old and 14-year-old kids. It's very fluid. It's a fluid world we live in, and the more, once mom and dad and grandma and grandpa are on the social platform, teens out. Like moved on.
But to that point, just know that social media is always fluid, and it's always changing, and there is no one size fits all solution for everybody. You've got to do what feels right for your brand and what you're willing to invest in, and what is the best method for communicating the story you need to have. I mean, some brands may not need to be on Instagram. Some brands may be better served on Pinterest.
Right.
That's the interesting piece. Is I was at a session last week where they were talking to a bunch of bloggers, and she's like, Pinterest is my best tool. She's like, that's where I get all the links to my website is through Pinterest.
Yeah.
And I was like,
and it's different for every brand. It's sometimes different products, right, are going to move differently through different channels. So yeah, I think you're constantly adapting. You want to get the advice and input of people who've gone before you. I think that's, mentors. It's very wise, but I know some mentors who will just kind of come in and say, well, this worked for me, so you should therefore you should always do this. And you're like, well, that's not an immutable law. It may be that worked for you because of your product and because of the time when you were building your business, and that there might be a different path for this brand.
Yep. Yeah, and that's the thing that someone used the phrase, modern marketing. And I mean, I look back to what worked 20 years ago and what works today, and the world of marketing continues to evolve. And so I completely agree with you, getting lots of mentor opinions, because people that have done it years ago might have one opinion, and people that have done it yesterday might have a different one, and both of them can be right.
That's right. And your peers can be a surprising source of information, because one of the things I learned pretty early on was I would hear this advice that mentors gave, some of which was excellent, a lot of it was terrible advice, and then I would watch these other folks. So if you've built a brand, or you're somehow well-to-do, you've got resources, and so you're going to build a brand, and you've got millions of dollars to invest in things. You're going to give somebody, and this works for you, and then someone else over here has about $11 to build a brand. Well, your path and the advice that you might give, well, you need to hire the best this, that, or the other, and you need to pay them the top of market and that sort of thing. And you say, well, that's not available to me over here, so I need to figure out another path. So you've got to I think, be aware and adaptive around both the advice that you give and the advice that you receive and how you apply it.
Oh, yeah, because many old school marketers will tell you, oh, just go hire an ad agency. And I'm like, that's 5 to 6 figures, depending on what you want them to do.
That's right.
And most brands don't have that. So can you find a few freelancers that can do the same kind of work for a little bit cheaper, because you don't need the full price?
Then you grow into that later.
You grow into it. It's an evolution. I mean, and that's the biggest thing about as I'll say, entrepreneur to Fortune 500 path is no matter where you are on that path, you're continuing to evolve with different resources, different tools, different opportunities because of where you are in your growth cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of evolution and growth cycle, so Stubbs had been around at the time for about 20 years, and the opportunity arose for Stubbs to be acquired by McCormick, the big seasoning company. It's based in Baltimore, right?
Yes.
So you were there when that was happening. And you actually were there after it happened. So after the acquisition, you became, and a lot of the board members, investors, and even the CEO had stepped aside. You became the general manager of the Stubbs brand underneath that larger McCormick umbrella. And again, you were based here in Austin. They're back in Baltimore. And I think that's a really fascinating perspective that I want to dig into for a few minutes with you. And that is, for a lot of startups and a lot of entrepreneurs, they think this is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. This is the goal. I'm trying to build this thing up, and I'm going to sell it, hopefully do really well, make some money, build this brand that kind of finds its way in the world. And I think it's really interesting, just, maybe you can provide us some perspective on, like, what's that process like when you're in it? And then what's it like afterwards? And now you're still, what you thought was a big brand, but now you're actually kind of a small fish in a much bigger pond. And how do you navigate that world? So kind of fill us in, like, tell us, how does that really work?
It's, excuse me, it's a very interesting process. So, coming from the side of being at Stubbs when we were going through the process of courting bidders and being involved in the due diligence process and understanding the questions people were asking to find out, they're doing their homework to find out the long-term perks of this business and how much they should pay for it.
That's right. And just so people know, you're not putting a page up on eBay here for bidders. So typically you're going to hire or retain an investment banker who is not, which is, again, if you're not in this world, that's sometimes sort of a misleading job category title. They're really sort of a mergers and acquisitions specialist. And so they shepherd both acquirers and the acquired through a process where you're putting together, the decision is made one way or another, either by the acquirer or the acquiree. We think we're open to this, and you're going to have conversations. Maybe they're shopping it to a lot of people, maybe to just a small handful of people. And somebody says, yeah, we're actually really interested. So then we're going to dig into this a little bit more. Due diligence is all the kind of, lifting up the hood of the car and really kind of checking out the wiring and how does this really work? And it's a big deal. It's super invasive and that sort of thing. So you went through all of that.
Went through all of that. Yeah. So, just to kind of add a little humor. So when you're starting your entrepreneurial company and you put together your pitch deck to try and get investors to invest money,
right?
When you're going through the sale process, it's not all that different. You put together a pitch deck to get people to buy you.
That's right.
Which is funny. They're giving you money, but then you're giving up your company at that point.
That's right. But it's probably even more granular, right? You have reviewed or audited financials and all of this stuff at that point.
You have 5-year forecasts. You have projections based on, opportunities. You have, in some cases, staffing projections where you say, well, if this is bought by a private equity firm, you're probably not going to change a whole lot of staffing. But if this is bought by a strategic partner,
and they already have a big accounting department,
of these roles. So it's definitely very interesting. And then going through the due diligence process is literally like they're trying to pull off every Band-Aid. And it's not like you have injuries, but they're digging pretty deep to find out what they need to find out, because they don't want to invest $50, $100, $200, $600, $1 billion to buy your brand without knowing what they're getting into. It's kind of like the used car. They're kicking the tires. They're rolling up and down the windows a few times.
They're calling in expert mechanics and this sort of thing. And I think that's really important, because you think, like, you may be able to snow some people, but they're going to bring in the experts and they're going to really dig in. And you say you're about to launch into Costco. That's interesting. Like, where do those, you have an agreement and that sort of thing? And you're like, no, but I had a good dinner with somebody once, and they're like, you had a good dinner? What actually happened at the dinner? Like they're really digging into, is this a sure thing? Is this not a sure thing? And you can think of it from the perspective of an acquirer. They're also saying, I'm going to discount this. Optimistic entrepreneur says, oh, we're going to be huge. And you're like, oh, well, show me how you actually are today. And if you're not all that you say you are, then that big offer, they may shave a few million off of it here or there and say, we're not so comfortable with this.
Yeah, it definitely is that. And I will say, like, a lot of things around your assumptions that you put in your 3 or 5 year plan, whatever you put, definitely get kicked. I mean, I remember having to present literally a strategic product plan. Like, here's the products we're going to launch. Here's the plan. Not completely specifically detailed, but we're going to add a new SKU of barbecue sauce in this year. We're going to add a whole new product line that is still to be determined, but we figure it'll be a value of X in this year. And it literally is a pretty in-depth process.
And those are writing, so you can think of it this way. You're writing checks at that point, and you better be able to cash them because sometimes there might be earn-out provisions that are tied to those things. So again, you can imagine, I've got a big fish on the hook. I'm going to sell my business. I'm going to tell them anything. Like, we'll launch 700 new products next year. Whatever you want to hear, people. Well, they're going to actually say, okay, your bonus and all these different things are actually tied to you launching 700 products. You're like, well, I didn't exactly mean 700. I was thinking more 2.
Yeah.
Right? And so, like, whatever you're promising at that point, you're probably going to be held accountable for.
And you absolutely are going to be held accountable for, or whoever is left is held accountable for.
That's right.
I mean, that was
case,
my experience at Stubbs. It was me. I went from being in charge of marketing and being a part of a team of, what were we? Probably close to 30 at that point.
Right.
To being in charge of Stubbs for McCormick and part of a team in Austin of 6.
That's right. Yeah.
And a lot of our cross-functional peers were up in Baltimore. And so there's communication challenges. There's I had to know exactly what was put into that, those promises that were made, because I was going to be the one responsible for making sure they came through. And did they all? No.
That's right.
But it's because some of it's educated guesses and things happen and you can't control for everything.
Right.
But, it was...
Even if you stress test some of those things, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't.
Sometimes you have things that are beyond your control.
Absolutely.
You can be in Costco for 5-7 years, and then the buyer changes and all of a sudden decides they don't want a regional brand.
That's right.
Checkbox, that happened.
That's right.
I mean, it's those little things can happen, and we had no control over it.
And you built that into your budget.
And we built that into our budget because we felt confident counting on that. We'd been in there 7 years.
That's right.
So, there's all of a sudden a hole. But I mean, that's the kind of stuff they're trying to, educatedly, to your point, discount. So you've got this revenue stream, you've got this, in theory, profitability stream. Not everybody's profitable.
Right.
That does help. I'm not going to lie. The fact that Stubbs was profitable helped us get a better multiple.
That's right.
You've got these streams, and they're literally doing advanced financial net present value, future value. What's this going to be worth in 5 years with these assumptions to figure out what to offer for your company.
Right.
And, the day the offers come in, it's literally like Christmas Day.
Absolutely.
But it can be happy or it can be sad. And there can be a wide range of offers. And it depends, to your point, if it's a strategic
and what your expectations were too.
Right. If you're strategic, let's just say that, you're Jim Bob Joe's Bacon Store and ConAgra comes up to you and says, I want to buy you. And you're working this one-on-one. It's still it's always a negotiation if you're actually, as Stubbs did a little bit, shopping the brand to a couple different potential people. When the offers come in, it's like, well, what's this going to be? It's really nerve-wracking.
Oh, absolutely. And if you thought you were going to sell your business for $500 million and the offers come in at $100 million, it's still $100 million. It's still a ton of money, but you're also kind of weirdly disappointed.
Yeah.
Right? Which is a strange place to be in, but it's still like there's a market for it, just like houses, right? So there are multiples, and you live in a neighborhood. Your home has this much square footage. It's it kind of stack ranks in the neighborhood in terms of nicer materials and all that stuff. But the neighborhood is the neighborhood, and so there are industry multiples. What's your growth rate? All this sort of stuff. All that's going into it, and then they're coming back to you with a number, and you can like it or you maybe you don't. But ultimately, that or whatever you negotiate, you're either going to take it or you're not, right? Yeah. And that, to your point, when you're profitable, that means you have the potential option of saying, no thanks.
Yeah.
Because we can actually pay for this. When you're not profitable, you could actually find yourself in a really difficult circumstance, right? Because your leverage has been removed in that circumstance where you go, we actually spent the last 6 to 12 months doing this. We didn't continue to grow the business. We're not profitable, and we're going to run out of money.
Mm-hmm.
And
now you're back in cash flow mode. You're back in fundraise mode. Back in early entrepreneur. I got to get more money.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah. So that can be a really dicey situation too. So all this happens. It's interesting. I'm sure you learned a lot through that process. And then at some point the deal closes, and then people, like some people, I'm sure you had dinners and parties and things like that, and some people leave.
It was definitely, I will say, from bids to closing, it's still a stressful process.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, just because you have an offer, until everything's signed on the dotted line doesn't mean it's done.
That's right. That's the due diligence.
That's still more due diligence. They've done enough to give you an offer, and then they're doing really deep due diligence and literally making sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and that your legal house is in shape, and that your financial house is in shape, and that your brand house is in shape, and the amount of documents that they require, the releases, the artistic releases, the
lawyer conference calls. Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot. And so you're on this high from the offers, and then now you're in this stressful period because the deal doesn't necessarily always go through.
That's right.
And so until you get that sign on the dotted line and the deal goes through, it's a whole different level of stress. And then you go through the emotion, because once the deal's done, as a person inside the acquiring company or acquired company, and I'll say actually even back on when the deal is announced. So you have bids come in, you tentatively enter into an agreement. That is when most of your employees then become very aware of what's going on.
That's right.
And emotions within your company change drastically.
That's right. Because up to that point, in most cases, a certain subset of executives are in the loop.
Right.
Other people may know nothing, or they may only know limited amounts.
Right. Or they may just have suspicions.
That's right.
Again,
you're managing the rumor mill too.
Yes. And once everybody knows, there's different levels of emotion. But it completely changes the company because no one knows what's going to happen from that point forward.
Am I still going to be here? Am I going to have a job? Do I get any money? How much money do I get? I don't know. Am I going to get a raise? Am I going to get all that? It introduces uncertainty into every part of it, good and bad.
Yep. And it's a lot to manage as a manager of people and as a manager of a company, and as to try and keep the business on the rails.
That's right. And you actually have to still do the thing that you were hired to do. Yeah.
Yes. You have to keep growing the business because that's what they're buying you for.
That's right. That's right.
And it's really easy to get distracted by any of those.
Yeah.
But it's just, I wasn't prepared for how much uncertainty the sale of the company brought to the company and the people who I viewed as my family. And especially in these small companies,
you get really close.
You get really close because you're in the trenches. You're working together, and you know their kids, you know their spouses, you know who's dating who, you know who's, buying a new house, you know who's buying a new car. It's a very personal and emotional tie. And that was the part, I think, that going through the whole transition, I didn't realize exactly how emotionally taxing it was going to be on myself and everybody else. Because you announce the deal, everybody knows. Then there's this long period of uncertainty. The deal closes. People are happy because, in theory, most people make something off of a deal like this.
Right.
People are happy.
Yeah.
But then the reality sets in of, oh boy, this is real now. Now I really, really, really don't know what's happening.
That's right.
And it goes to a whole different level.
And on some level, nobody knows what's happening at that point because you're entering into uncharted waters.
Correct. The only person that knows what's going to happen is the person that now owns the company because you don't.
That's right.
And that's, at that window, even pre-sale, I was very much of the mindset that I wasn't, Stubbs was a little bit my baby. We'd done a lot with it. Yeah. And I wasn't ready to let go of it. And that's why I wanted to stay on. I had the opportunity, I elected to. Yeah. But, I made it known that I wanted to stay on and, had the opportunity to do so. And it was definitely an interesting transition as you go through the period of uncertainty to then the company comes down and starts,
They bring the delegation.
They say they don't have a plan, but they always have a plan.
Of course.
Some sort of plan. Yeah.
Right.
And the delegation is the appropriate word.
Yeah, because they bought you for a reason.
Yes.
Right? And I think that's an important thing maybe for us to pause here. In most cases, in almost all cases, a large CPG, large food company, whatever it is, many of them are not growing very rapidly, right? So they're either, and we're talking about the big mothership, they're either kind of flatlining, they may be declining. Mm-hmm. And if they have investors, and most of them have investors, many of them are public, they are attempting to tell a growth story. And that growth story to their investors and to the investment community is, look, we bought this, yes, we have 12 or 20 or 100 other brands that aren't doing anything, but let's talk about Stubbs. Like, it's doing awesome, and we just bought it, and isn't this so exciting? And you should give us more of your money because we're so great now. And so they bought you for a reason, and part of that reason is growth, and it's the shiny new thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so they have a plan and a vision for how you help them accomplish their ends, and that may or may not align with what you thought you were going to do.
Yes, the biggest thing is the control of your business ceases to be your own.
Yeah,
it goes into because to your point, exactly, they had an idea for Stubbs, and they wanted a sauce company. Mm-hmm. They got a sauce company with other products.
Yeah.
Some of those products today still exist. Some of them don't.
That's right. Because they are or are not strategic to them. Right?
Correct. Or they're operationally challenging, mm-hmm. or your volumes aren't big enough for them to move them in-house.
Or they don't like the margins on them. Yeah.
Or they don't see the reason, or they're not, they've got other products in their portfolio that can take up the same shelf space that you're asking for these
That's right.
that are bigger.
That's right.
And it's it's always interesting when you start to see what role your business plays in their portfolio.
Yeah.
And that was the fortunate part of my opportunity of staying on post, is I got to see exactly where they wanted Stubbs to play and how they wanted Stubbs to play, and to that extent, what role they wanted. They weren't especially interested in our rub business. They own the Spice aisle.
They have the whole
still
aisle.
Out.
They have
it's
the whole
still
aisle.
out.
Yeah.
They still have Stubbs rubs, but they're not today what they were when we sold.
That's right. Just not a priority.
It's not a priority. Getting the Stubbs marinades to get shelf space when they own Lowry's, and they had Grill Mates launched a marinade right before they bought us.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's a little tricky.
You're fighting. Yeah. You're the third brand on the totem pole there.
That's right.
So it's a little bit interesting, because you go from running this holistic business and this one brand to...
And it's all, how do we grow Stubbs? How do we grow Stubbs?
Yeah. But Stubbs becomes defined as barbecue sauce.
Yeah.
Or becomes defined as whatever your product is, or however the company needs you to be defined. In this case, they were most focused on barbecue sauce.
Right.
And the other thing is that when you go into this company, I think you said bright, shiny thing, you are the bright, shiny new thing. Mm-hmm. And you've got to figure out how to take advantage of being the bright, shiny new thing.
Today you are the bright, shiny new thing. Yeah.
The next acquisition, the next thing that goes on, you're no longer the bright, shiny new thing.
Yeah.
And that was, the good and the bad of Stubbs moving into McCormick was that it was, I'm going to use the word assimilation.
Yeah.
They were trying to fit us into their mold.
Right.
And Stubbs was not their mold.
Right.
So there were definitely some growing pains within that. And I think the good news is that they were very willing to listen to the fact that, I gave them a lot of feedback about, if you do this again, do it differently. If you do this again, do it differently. And I think they've approached future acquisitions differently because of some of the challenges we had trying to fit in.
Yeah, trying to blend those systems and the cultures, and you've got startup-y, kind of Tex-Mex Western barbecue thing happening down here in Austin, and then you've got legacy brands in Baltimore. It's a lot of different cultural challenges.
Well, and the funniest story, and I can tell this because it's just when you're going through an acquisition and you're transitioning, and it was a transition period. My favorite phrase I used to say was, I don't know what I don't know. Yeah. And I didn't know what I didn't know. The people at Stubbs didn't know what they didn't know. And the people at McCormick didn't know what they didn't know.
It's true.
And so it seems like such a simple process. But we had to get an electric bill paid. And our accounting group was now up in Baltimore.
Yeah.
But nobody bothered to tell us how to send a bill up to Baltimore to get it paid.
That's right.
So we had the electric company knock on our door because nobody told Baltimore how to pay our electric bill either.
That's right.
So nobody was paying our electric bill.
I don't know. Yeah.
And I was like, I
thought mom and dad had it.
Yeah. It really was.
Yeah.
It was, you told us to send it here and to scan it and send it to this email box. We did that. Nobody told them what they were supposed to do with it from there.
They're like, oh, I didn't know I had that email box.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's just some of the simplest, silliest stuff that you
sure. But you really dig into it and you go, well, it has to get paid somehow. You're not paying it anymore. How do you transition that? And where's the checklist?
It's even those like, making sure the employees that are left get paid, making sure the bills are getting paid, making sure your products are getting shipped, making sure you train if your sales force isn't kept on, making sure you train the new sales force in your manners of working.
Pretty big deal. Yeah.
It's a pretty big deal when your methods of doing trade promotion might be different than the way the company you're going into is. I mean, it's bridging a lot of gaps, and that's going to be a challenge no matter what business it is.
You're transitioning health insurance from one thing to another. All of the things.
All those things.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the getting bills paid one still makes me laugh.
I know.
It shouldn't have been that hard.
But it makes all the sense in the world though, because you go, well, yeah, at some point you got to figure this out.
Yeah.
Like one day you're paying your own electric bill, or 1 month. Next month somebody else is paying for it. Yeah. So absolutely.
And these big companies.
There's
a
processes.
lot of them have processes and challenges with communication. And that's, the biggest piece is if you stay on post-acquisition, learning how to be a squeaky wheel. You've got to be in front of the right people at the right times.
That's right.
And I kid you not, that was one of the things that I learned that I thought was probably the most important, career, piece is don't ever be afraid to be a squeaky wheel, because I had... not the CEO, but the head of consumer products for the U.S. business calling me monthly just to make sure we were okay at Stubbs.
That's
because
good.
I was like, I'm going to be a squeaky wheel and make sure this gets done. Because I cared so much about the brand. And that's the other piece. No acquiring company is ever going to care about your brand as much as you do.
It's true.
No matter how much you try to make them care, there will be a few that do.
That's right.
But you're still
cold,
a puzzle.
harsh reality.
You're still a puzzle piece in their puzzle, and you're, as you said earlier, you're bought to fill a hole and to figure out what their role is, and that's the role they want you for.
Yeah. Okay, so you come out of that experience, and I know you've worked with a number of different early stage brands and stuff like that. As you've encountered, as you've kind of been in the startup world and this sort of thing, what are some of the common tips, tricks, bits of wisdom that you found yourself sharing with a lot of founders who've approached you and said, Carrie, what should we do? Like, are there certain kind of common pitfalls that you see or advice that you give?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that I really focus on, especially with early stage founders. I've worked with companies, pre-revenue up to 10 million in the past couple of years. And, the biggest one is that most of them need to take the time and make sure they're defining their brand and what their brand means. Because I say this all the time, a product without a reason for it to be there and consumers to connect with it is still just a product. And I can switch products any day.
It's a nameless widget.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. It's a bag of chips. Why do you buy Doritos? Well, I buy Doritos because I like the flavor. But do you buy Doritos or do you buy H-E-B Doritos? Well, honestly, I don't care. Why don't you care? Because Doritos doesn't resonate with me anymore. That's just one of those kind of, you need to make sure you're building your brand in a way that makes an emotional connection with that consumer.
And do you see a lot of people who skip that step or think it doesn't matter?
A lot that think, especially I'll use the barbecue space. There's a lot of brands in the barbecue space that just threw something out there. And then how am I supposed to connect with a brand that has no meaning?
Yeah.
I see it in the salty snack space a lot too. I see it in the beverage space a lot. It's like, well, I've got this thing. Well, this thing is easily repeatable by anybody else.
Yep.
So make sure what you're building in your brand is that your own points of differentiation, your own story, your own twist on why you do what you do, because those are the brands, those are the products that are going to have longevity.
Yeah, it separates the signal from the noise.
Exactly. Because, in today's world of 5-second attention spans. I keep shortening it every time I talk about it.
That's right.
5-second attention spans.
That's really 4.5 now.
Yeah,
it
probably
already
by
shortened.
now. We've already lost it. We as humans are less connected than we ever have been. And we are looking for those opportunities to connect with people on an emotional level because our body needs that. And we can connect with products on an emotional level. I know a lot of people I see your Yeti cup. A lot of people connect with Yeti very passionately on an emotional level.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's a cooler and a beverage device.
Yeah.
But people love that. And it's what Yeti has built around that really has done a good job. And that's what I try and reiterate to entrepreneurs is making sure that when you understand it's not just the widget you're selling, it's why you're selling the widget. It's the reason why behind the buy. What are you giving them that no one else can?
Yeah, that's wonderful.
The other piece is manage your cash flow.
Absolutely. Let's dig into that. And again, like this is where your old tax accountant.
This is where my accountant comes in. But I've seen way too many companies get an influx of money. They've raised money. They get an influx of money, so they feel very rich because the bank account has got numbers in it, and they're happy.
That's right.
And they're not penny pinching. And that money that's supposed to last 18 months lasts 6 because they invest too quickly in things that maybe don't matter.
Right.
And I'm not saying they don't matter, but like just take your time. Make sure you're managing. Make sure you're profitable. Make sure you're not just throwing money at trade. Because I've also seen multiple companies that have negative gross margins.
That's right. You're buying your way into accounts.
Right. And you may need to do that early on.
Right.
But you've got to be able to pull it back and make it sustainable. So then if your margins are 30% and you're spending 30% on trade spend, you're breaking even.
That's right.
And is that sustainable? Are you really going to get that much more? So it's kind of thinking ahead and really figuring out, is charging $5.95 when I go out better than charging $5.49? Is it really going to make that big of a difference, even though I can make 50 more cents a unit? It's those kind of, the tax accountant in me is like, manage your cash flow, because I've seen a lot of small guys get behind the 8 ball when it comes to cash.
Oh yeah.
And then ultimately have to make choices to pull back really fast right when their momentum is hitting.
Right. Well, and then also understanding that, your chart of accounts, your profit and loss statement or your income statement looks really good, but ultimately you've got to make sure that you have the cash to pay the people that you need to pay in order to make it to the next month. And so if you have a lumpy business or a business that might be seasonal or cyclical, or you have to buy a lot of inventory in February, but you don't really get paid for that inventory until much later in the year, you need to account for that, and you need to make sure that you have a line of credit in place. You need to have whatever resources that you need in order to make sure that, I have this huge opportunity in October, but you can't get there because you ran out of money in September, and that's tragic.
Yep. And that's, it all just comes down to like how you manage your business and how you make choices. And, you've got to spend to grow. So you do have to invest to be able to grow a business, but, make sure those investments are giving you a return, or at least propelling you forward in the way you need to be propelled forward, because, there are people would much rather see you continue as a going concern than go out of business.
That's right.
So from your vendors, just know that you can talk to them.
They would like to continue for you to buy things. Yeah, that's right.
But
so what are you like right now? What are you excited about? What's next for you? How are you, what's in the future?
I think the thing that I'm most excited about is I see the future of Austin CPG, because I'm connecting with all these little brands at the micro level.
Yeah.
I'm connecting with
You see this next generation.
Yeah. And what I love is the passion. The passion these people have to bring CPG products to life, to make the world a better place. And that, to me, yes, it may be something silly as a salsa. It may be something like a sports drink. But the energy and the passion these people have is really exciting, because they're understanding what consumers are looking for, and they're understanding, they're leveraging their networks and the people that have done it to know how to do it better, and to avoid some of the pitfalls. And I think that's the biggest piece that I really enjoy, is watching, just connecting dots for people and watching them talk to somebody who's been in the operation space of where they're doing and understand what they don't know, and helping them get up and ramp up, and then, just watching them launch and see what happens. Not everything's going to be successful.
It isn't.
But It's really fun.
But at some point you start to see. I think there's an element where you develop a pattern recognition, and you start to say, this one has a real chance.
Yep.
This one not so much. Right? What do you look for in those? In those, like, what do you see in the brands and founders that you think they actually may have a shot at this?
I look for something that it's interesting you say that, because there is definitely a Me Too factor to a lot of what I see.
Yeah.
But the things that really stand out to me are the people who are trying something that is risky. So they're taking a traditional product and executing it in a very different way.
Yeah.
And it's either going to be wildly successful or a big flop.
Right. I call it the Airbnb test.
Yes.
Like Airbnb in the early days was either a terrible idea or a brilliant idea. And I don't think anybody was sure which one it was going to be at the time, right?
Yep.
And so, but it was a big deal. It's either a big deal or a terrible deal. And so you see that with some of these different brands, like it could go either way.
I do. And the thing with those kind of brands, the brands that are willing to take a risk and push the envelope a little bit, is that they're either going to be wildly successful or they're going to fail really fast. The Me Too brands that I see out there can go and they can get shelf space because of a relationship with XYZ buyer, or they can get this event because they know this, and they can plod along.
It's very incremental.
But it's at a snail's pace that they're plodding along. And they may or may not make it. They may never break. They may always be a $5 million business. They may never break.
And you better love making your Me Too product, because you're going to be making it in 20 years.
Oh yeah, and that's that's a part of that process. But I can see
and if that's what you love doing, awesome.
Good.
Like that's super. That's great.
But don't have plans to flip it in 5 years if that's what you're trying to do.
Probably not how it's going to go. Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's what's fun. And I think the other thing I see is I just see the opportunity for new brands and new businesses to come into the CPG space. And
Yeah.
I heard a statistic the other day at an event, and it's stuck with me, and I've repeated it probably 20 times now, and it's only been like a month ago I heard this. But it was a study that had said that millennials are far more likely to trust new brands than old brands, which to me is so insightful and shocking simultaneously.
It is a massive opportunity.
It's a massive opportunity. But why are they so willing to trust new brands? Because we have a 5-second attention span, and something new is coming out every day, and there's this fear of missing out. But you don't have to be the flash in the pan brand either.
No.
If you can balance it right, you can get something that's long-term sustainable, that's going to be around for a while.
Your margins are right. You're frugal with the money that you make. All of these sorts of things.
It's managing the chessboard.
Yeah,
and some days the chessboard's going to look ugly.
Yeah.
But you just figure out what it works. And I just think, there's a lot of opportunity for disruption in categories that have been stagnant for years.
Yeah.
There's a lot of opportunity to reach consumers in new and different ways. There's a lot of online shopping, online grocery shopping is coming. Your discovery process in a grocery store is very different today than it was 20 years ago, when I walk in now to a grocery store and I know what I'm going to buy, and I don't walk every aisle because I don't have the time.
Yep.
And 20 years ago, you just walked every aisle because that's what you did. That's how you found new products. Now I find new products through my friends or through my social media or through events I go to. And it's just, the opportunities just seem endless, and it's really exciting and fun.
Yeah.
Because, the brands that are willing to change and adapt and really work with what consumers are looking for to make their lives easier are going to win. So
that's awesome. Well, I'm really glad that you're here, that you've been in Austin now for several years, and that you are a major part of this ecosystem, and that you're helping all these early stage brands and doing really good work, and sharing your experience like you have today. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad to be here. It's been a fun ride. I mean, Austin is definitely my home, and I have a lot of passion towards Austin brands. So
That's right. Well, there's a lot of good ones here to choose from. So. Once again, just want to thank you for watching and listening. And if you're getting a lot out of our conversation today with Carrie Lumb-Dewey, I hope that you will, obviously share, subscribe, and tell your friends. And the purpose here at the Barcode Podcast is to equip emerging consumer brands And our hope is that these kind of candid conversations give you some unique insights and perspectives into how you can think about your own, maybe it's just a project or maybe it's a real business and you're scaling up and you have some major strategic decisions to make. And hopefully by, kind of collecting and sharing the wisdom of some folks who've walked down this path before, it benefits you. So if that's beneficial to you or would be beneficial to your friends or colleagues, please share it. And just, again, remind you and remind your friends that we have lots of resources available at barcodestartup.com. We have transcripts of these conversations. So if you're not a podcast listener, you can read our conversation. If you're not a podcast listener and you're not a reader, we have video of our conversation. So however you best process this information, we've tried to make it as accessible to you as possible. So once again, thank you for joining us and look forward to hearing from you next time.